Welcome to Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world. Sleepcast is created to help you relax, slow down, and gently drift off to sleep. There's nothing you need to remember and nowhere else you need to be. Simply get comfortable, close your eyes, and allow tonight's quiet story to carry you away. And now, we hand things over to our two hosts for today's episode. Rest well and enjoy.
So picture this. It is February 23rd, 1874, and if you were to walk down the street in the Pimlico district of London and step into a sporting goods shop called French & Co., you could buy a cardboard box.
Just a standard, unassuming box.
Right, a totally normal box. But inside, you'd find a couple of wooden poles, a net, a wooden mallet, some pegs, and like 4 really awkward-looking rackets, plus a handful of rubber balls and a pretty poorly translated instruction manual.
Yeah, the translation was definitely rough.
But the wild thing is, you didn't know it. The shopkeeper certainly didn't know it. But if you bought that box, you were literally buying the exact blueprint for what would become a multi-billion-dollar, globally televised obsession.
It really is one of the most, deliberately specific origin stories in the history of human recreation.
Yeah.
Because we tend to think of massive global sports as these ancient organic things, right?
Ugh.
Like they just slowly evolved out of medieval villages or, ancient rituals.
Absolutely.
But this sport was literally packaged, patented, and sold over the counter on a specific Tuesday in Victorian England.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today we are taking you, the listener, on a massive journey. We are doing a deep dive into the evolution of tennis.
And it is quite a journey.
It really is. We're looking at how it morphed from this boxed Victorian lawn party activity into the high-stakes, physically grueling, and just socially transformative professional sport that we watch today in 2026.
And to chart this 150-year evolution, we're pulling from a truly phenomenal collection of historical documentation. We are integrating the official histories of Roland-Garros in Paris, the championships at Wimbledon, the International Tennis Federation, and the Davis Cup.
Right. And crucially, we're spending a lot of time today in the meticulously detailed archives of the International Tennis Hall of Fame.
Specifically looking at their records chronicling Black tennis history.
Yes, exactly. The systemic barriers that were erected and the athletes who tore them down. So our mission today is to extract the most surprising facts, the unsung heroes, and the critical turning points that literally painted the lines on the court you watched today.
I love that.
So let's go back to that cardboard box in 1874. Who actually put this sport in a box?
That would be a retired English Army officer named Major Walter Clopton Wingfield.
Okay.
He essentially walked into the patent office and obtained a provisional patent for a portable court designed for playing a brand new game. And he decided to call this game spheristique.
I'm sorry, spheristique? That sounds like a Victorian throat lozenge. Why on earth would he name a consumer product that?
Well, it was a rather clumsy attempt at classical Greek. It translates roughly to skill with a ball.
Oh, okay.
Wingfield was, a bit of a romantic. He hoped the classical gravitas would appeal to the educated upper middle class. But just in case his marketing instincts were off, which they definitely were, he hedged his bets.
Smart man.
He added the subtitle lawn tennis to the box. And I think linguists and sports broadcasters everywhere are eternally grateful that lawn tennis won out.
Oh, for sure. Imagine trying to get a crowd hyped for the Spheristique Open.
Right. He even wrote an accompanying rule book entitled The Major's Game of Lawn Tennis.
But wait, I have to challenge the premise here a little bit. He patented this in 1874, but hitting a ball over a net with a racket wasn't exactly a new concept. I mean, didn't King Henry VIII famously play tennis hundreds of years earlier? You see those old paintings of him in the courtyard?
You are absolutely right, and it's a really vital distinction to make. Forms of hitting a ball back and forth against walls or over ropes have existed for centuries.
Like, where did it actually start?
It traces back to the French monastic game of jeu de paume, where they literally just used the palms of their hands.
Ouch.
Yeah, totally. But what Henry VIII played is known today as real tennis or court tennis.
So how is that different from the box Wingfield was selling?
Completely different mechanics. Real tennis was played indoors in highly specialized, walled, asymmetrical stone courts.
Oh, wow.
And the ball was solid. It was often made of tightly wound cloth and animal hair, covered in leather, so it didn't bounce very much.
It just kind of skidded.
Exactly, it skidded. It was an incredibly complex game of angles, almost like a hybrid of, squash, chess, and tennis. And crucially, because building these indoor courts was astronomically expensive, it was a game reserved strictly for royalty and the extreme aristocracy.
So Wingfield's innovation wasn't the racket or the net. What was the specific technological disruption that allowed him to put this in a portable box?
The hollow rubber ball. That is the entire linchpin of this sport.
Wait, really? Why does that change everything? Is it just the bounce?
Exactly. I mean, before the 1840s, rubber was highly unstable. It would melt in the summer heat and then just snap in the winter cold.
Right. Totally useless for sports.
But once Charles Goodyear perfected the process of vulcanization, which is adding sulfur to rubber and heating it to create a stable, elastic material, it completely changed the world.
And Wingfield just connected the dots.
Right. He realized that if you took vulcanized rubber and made the ball hollow, it would actually bounce on a soft, natural surface, like grass.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Because a solid, leather-bound ball is just going to thud and die on a damp English lawn. It absorbs all the kinetic energy.
Exactly.
But a hollow rubber ball compresses on impact and snaps back to its original shape, launching it back into the air.
Precisely. And this technological leap coincided perfectly with a massive socioeconomic shift in Victorian England.
Which was what? The rise of the lawn?
The rise of the lawn, which was made possible by another recent invention, the mechanical lawnmower, invented by Edwin Budding in 1830.
I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah, before the lawnmower, keeping grass short required a flock of sheep or, a massive team of servants with scythes. Suddenly, this rapidly growing affluent middle class could maintain pristine, shortcut lawns at their private homes.
So you have this new demographic of wealthy middle-class Victorians. They have these newly manicured lawns. They eat a massive, heavy Victorian lunch, and they want to go outside and do something. Up until 1874, what were they actually doing?
Mostly playing croquet. But croquet is remarkably slow and fairly static. Wingfield observed this market and realized this demographic was craving a much more energetic activity.
They needed to burn off those heavy lunches.
Exactly. And furthermore, because the hollow rubber ball made the game reliant on timing and agility rather than just brute physical force, he correctly calculated that this game could be aggressively marketed to women.
Which was huge, right? Because women were largely excluded from highly energetic outdoor sports at that time.
Completely. So he literally saw a gap in the leisure market, utilized a new material technology in vulcanized rubber, bundled it with a net and pawls, and scaled it.
It's just an incredible entrepreneurial play. It's like a Kickstarter campaign from the 1800s, and the historical records show it was an absolute smash hit. The boxes just flew off the shelves at French & Co. But how do you go from people playing this in their back gardens to an actual formalized sporting competition?
Right. It's quite a leap.
Yeah, like who makes the rules when the inventor is just some guy selling boxes?
Well, the speed of institutionalization is just staggering here. The game was so instantly popular that established sporting bodies had to intervene immediately.
How fast are we talking?
Just 1 year after the patent. In 1875, the Marylebone Cricket Club, which was the premier undisputed authority of cricket in England, they stepped in and officially became the governing body of lawn tennis, issuing a unified set of rules.
It's wild to think that cricket essentially midwifed tennis into existence.
Yeah, it really is.
But they needed a venue to play it right. And this is where the irony of the sport's origins really shines for me. The venue that became the absolute global cathedral of tennis was originally built for the exact game tennis was rendering obsolete.
The All England Croquet Club.
Exactly.
It had been founded in 1868 on Whirple Road in the London suburb of Wimbledon. And by 1875, just a year after Wingfield's box hit the market, the club's members were clamoring to play the new game instead.
So the croquet players wanted to play tennis.
Right. The club somewhat reluctantly agreed to set aside one of their pristine croquet lawns for lawn tennis.
And tennis just cannibalized croquet from the inside out. Within 2 years, tennis was so much more popular that the club realized they could make money off it. So in 1877, they took a massive leap, changed their name to the All England Croquet and Lawn Tennis Club, and decided to hold a public tournament.
And you know why they held it, right?
To pay for the repair of their pony roller, the heavy machine they used to flatten the lawns. That tournament was the very first Wimbledon.
It was.
But when you look at the archival details of that 1877 tournament, it is almost impossible to reconcile with the Wimbledon of today. Today we think of, the retractable roof on center court, the multi-million-dollar prize money, the celebrity-packed royal box. But in 1877 at Warple Road, it was incredibly primitive.
How primitive are we talking here?
Well, they had a temporary grandstand made of 3 wooden planks that offered seating for exactly 30 people.
30 people, wow.
Yeah, and the total attendance for the final was 200. Plus, the rackets the players were using didn't look like modern rackets at all. They were lopsided, resembling heavy wooden snowshoes, because the physics of racket construction just hadn't been dialed in yet.
The sweet spot must have been tiny.
Basically non-existent. And the balls were basically naked rubber covered with hand-sewn flannel outer casings to keep them from flying too wildly.
It was as grassroots as a sport can possibly be, and they only held one event, the gentlemen's singles.
Right. And the first champion was a local Wimbledon man named Spencer Gore. But here's the best part. Gore was fundamentally a cricket player.
Of course he was.
He actually went on the record stating that he preferred cricket to lawn tennis, and he publicly doubted that this new tennis fad would even last.
History has a wonderful sense of irony, doesn't it? The man who won the first Wimbledon didn't even respect the sport.
Nope, not at all.
And he lost his title the very next year in 1878 to a man named Frank Haddo, a British tea planter who was just visiting from Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka.
Wait, a tea planter just showed up and won?
Yeah, and he actually invented the lob. Gore would rush the net, and Haddo simply hit it high over his head. Haddo won, went back to Ceylon, and never even bothered to return to defend his title.
That is hilarious.
And it gets better. The winner the year after that, in 1879, was the Reverend John Hartley, who remains the only clergyman to ever win a Grand Slam.
So the first few years are really just a revolving door of curious amateurs. But by the 1880s, the mechanics of the game undergo a massive evolution. The sources point to this specific decade as the birth of the modern style of play. If I'm watching tennis in 1879 versus, say, 1885, what exactly am I seeing change?
You are seeing the birth of aggression and vertical geometry. And you can credit 2 men for this. The Renshaw twins, William and Ernest.
The Renshaw Rush.
Exactly. William Renshaw won 7 Wimbledon singles titles, 6 of them consecutively in the 1880s. Before the Renshaws, tennis was largely a passive baseline game. Players just stood at the back of the court and gently tapped the ball back and forth, essentially waiting for an error.
Because rushing the net was initially considered ungentlemanly, right? It was seen as almost deceptive.
Yes, the Victorian sporting ethos was built on a very specific idea of fair play, which often translated to not trying too hard to exploit your opponent's physical weaknesses. It was supposed to be polite.
Right, polite tennis.
But the Renshaws didn't care about that at all. They introduced the hard overarm serve. And crucially, they introduced the overhead smash and aggressive volleying. They would serve, sprint to the net, and just physically overpower their opponents, cutting off the angles before the ball could even bounce.
Conceptually, that fundamentally changes the physics of a rally. Because if you take the ball out of the air of volley, you are having the time your opponent has to react. You're weaponizing time.
Exactly. They weaponized the geometry of the court. And the Victorian public went absolutely nuts for it.
They loved it.
Oh, the archives show that their popularity was so immense that it caused the first real tennis boom. As you said, the Renshaw Rush. The crowds swelled so massively that the local railway had to build a special temporary train stop just to handle the thousands of spectators pouring into the Warple Road grounds. They were regularly exceeding crowds of 3,000 people.
But as this gentleman's sport was booming, there was a massive demographic being actively sidelined. Wingfield had explicitly designed the game to be played by women, and women were playing it aggressively in private clubs. But the All England Club kept shutting them out of the official championship.
They really did. The club had politely but very firmly turned down several formal requests to include a ladies' singles event. The patriarchal view of the era basically deemed intense public physical exertion inappropriate and potentially biologically harmful for women.
The classic Victorian excuse.
Right. But the pressure became completely insurmountable as the sport grew. So in 1884, they finally capitulated.
Capitulated is definitely the word. Because it was a very reluctant secondary inclusion.
Very secondary.
Yeah, the women were not allowed to start their tournament until the men's event had completely finished. Furthermore, their entrance fee was 10 shillings and 6 pence, which was exactly half of what the men paid.
And the prize for the winner was not a golden trophy, but a silver flower basket valued at 20 guineas.
A flower basket. Unbelievable.
That first tournament in 1884 was won by a 19-year-old named Maud Watson, who actually had to play her own sister, Lillian, in the final. But while Maud Watson broke the barrier, it was just a few years later that the women's game produced its first true, undeniable sporting prodigy.
Yes. We have to talk about Lottie Dod.
Lottie Dod is just one of the most fascinating athletes of the 19th century. She was a sporting all-rounder from Cheshire. In 1887, she entered Wimbledon and won the singles crown.
And do you know how old she was?
She was 15 years and 285 days old.
And just to put that in perspective for you, as of 2026, 139 years later, that remains the all-time record for the youngest Wimbledon singles champion in history.
It's incredible. And she didn't just win, she dominated. She won the 4 Wimbledons she subsequently entered between 1888 and 1893, and over that entire 5-year span, she dropped exactly 1 set.
I want to stop and really analyze the physical reality of what she was doing because it is mind-blowing to me. Lottie Dod was playing in the 1880s. Women on the court were required to adhere to strict Victorian modesty standards.
Right, the clothing was absurd.
They were wearing heavy ankle-length wool or flannel skirts, long-sleeved blouses, high collars, petticoats, and corsets. We are talking about carrying perhaps 10 to 15 pounds of sweat-soaked fabric while your lung capacity is being artificially restricted by a corset.
Just brutal conditions for high-level athletics.
Exactly. And under those conditions, a 15-year-old girl is executing aggressive net volleys and dismantling adult women who couldn't handle her power.
It is a testament to extraordinary biomechanical efficiency and sheer athletic genius on her part. She was hitting the ball so cleanly and anticipating so perfectly that she essentially bypassed the restrictions of her clothing. And her dominance really proved that women's tennis was a serious athletic endeavor, not just a gentle garden distraction.
So the sport has conquered Britain. It has its superstars, its massive crowds, and a formalized tournament. But how does a British lawn game become a global diplomatic battleground?
Well, Wingfield's bosses didn't just stay on British soil. They were highly portable, meaning they easily made it onto transatlantic steamships. By 1881, tennis was thriving in the United States.
Spreading like wildfire.
Oh, absolutely. The forerunner to the U.S. Open was established that year at the Newport Casino in Rhode Island, which, very fittingly, is now the physical home of the International Tennis Hall of Fame. But the true catalyst for the globalization of the sport was actually a college rivalry.
Right. The origins of international tennis didn't come from some massive governmental sports ministry. It literally came from 4 guys on the Harvard University tennis team.
Yeah.
In 1899, they simply wanted to set up a match to see if they could beat the British at their own game.
And one of those Harvard students was a man named Dwight Davis. He took the initiative, designed a tournament format that pitted a team of Americans against a team of British players, and decided they needed a physical prize to fight for.
And what did he do?
He used his own money to commission a massive sterling silver punch bowl. It was designed by William Durgin and crafted by the silversmith Roland Rhodes.
The official name was the International Lawn Tennis Challenge, but because he bought the bowl, everyone just started calling it the Davis Cup.
Makes sense. The first event took place in 1900 at the Longwood Cricket Club in Boston. The British sent over a team, fully expecting to easily handle the upstart Americans.
They probably thought it would be a walk in the park.
Exactly. Instead, the Americans, utilizing a much more aggressive, hard-serving style of play, shocked the British and raced to a 3-0 lead to win the cup.
What's fascinating here is the causality. Because the Americans won, the British suddenly had a massive chip on their shoulder. They had to win it back.
National pride was on the line.
So they sent another team, and then Belgium wants in. And France wants in. Australasia, which was Australia and New Zealand combined at the time they want in. Within a decade, this Harvard students' punch bowl essentially created a global sports network.
And that rapid internationalization completely necessitated global governance. I mean, if France is playing America and Australia, whose rules are they using? What is the exact height of the net? What is the maximum compression of the ball?
Right. They needed a United Nations of tennis.
Exactly. So on March 1st, 1913, delegates from 15 nations convened inside the doors of 34 Rue de Provence in Paris.
You had representatives from Australasia, Austria, Belgium, France, Germany, Great Britain, South Africa, Sweden, and several others.
It's a real global summit.
Yeah, and together they founded the International Lawn Tennis Federation, or ILTF. Because the meeting was in Paris, French was chosen as the official language of the organization. Their primary mandate was to lock down a unified, standardized set of rules for the entire globe. And once those global rules were locked in, the stage was set for different nations to rise up and claim dominance. As we move out of the devastation of the First World War and into the 1920s, no nation grabbed the sport by the throat quite like the French.
The 1920s and 30s are universally recognized as a golden age of tennis, characterized by high society glamour and immense stylistic evolution. And France was the absolute epicenter.
Now, the French clay court championships had actually existed since 1891. But for decades, they were highly insular. You were only allowed to compete if you were a member of a registered French tennis club.
Very exclusive.
But in 1925, the French Federation made a monumentally lucrative decision.
They finally opened their doors. They allowed international competitors to enter the tournament, and the modern concept of the French Open was born.
But just because they let the foreigners in doesn't mean the foreigners won. In fact, opening the tournament just provided a global stage for the French to prove they were basically untouchable. Let's start with the women's game, and a player who essentially invented modern sports celebrity, Suzanne Lenglen.
Suzanne Lenglen wasn't just a tennis player. She was a true cultural phenomenon. She was arguably the sport's first global superstar, transcending tennis in the way someone like Muhammad Ali or Michael Jordan would decades later.
What made her so different mechanically? Like, how did she actually play?
It was her fluidity and her biomechanics. She moved like a dancer. Lenglen had been trained in ballet, and she brought that kinetic chain into her tennis strokes. Instead of the stiff, upright Victorian posture, she leaped, she stretched, she hit the ball while airborne.
Very dynamic.
Very. She won the French title 6 times between 1920 and 1926. But her impact had already started in 1919 when she went to Wimbledon and won the title as a 20-year-old.
And she completely revolutionized tennis fashion out of pure physical necessity, right? She ditched the heavy corsets and long wool skirts. She showed up at Wimbledon wearing a calf-length, short-sleeved, pleated silk dress without a petticoat.
Which was shocking at the time.
It caused an absolute scandal in the British press, but she didn't care. She proved that to hit the ball with maximum efficiency, you couldn't be bound in wool.
She brought an unprecedented level of glamour. People came to watch her drink cognac on the changeovers, wear her signature bandeau, and completely dominate her opponents. Meanwhile, on the men's side, France produced a quartet of players that changed the geometry of the men's game forever.
The legendary Four Musketeers: Henri Cochet, René Lacoste, Jean Barotra, and Jacques Brugnon.
Right, between 1922 and 1932, these 4 men exerted total dominance over the sport, racking up 10 singles titles at the French championships among them.
And they all played so differently, didn't they?
They did. They all had distinct styles. Barotra was the bounding Basque, an incredibly athletic net rusher. Lacoste, who would later invent the polo shirt and found the famous clothing brand, was known as the Crocodile for his baseline tenacity and strategic brilliance.
Hence the crocodile logo.
Exactly. And Cochet was a master of touch and timing, taking the ball impossibly early.
But while they dominated the individual tournaments, their most consequential achievement, the thing that actually physically changed the landscape of Paris, happened in the Davis Cup.
Yes. In 1927, the Musketeers traveled to Philadelphia. The United States had held the Davis Cup for 7 consecutive years, anchored by the great Bill Tilden. But the Musketeers achieved the unthinkable. They defeated the Americans on their home soil to win the cup for France.
It was a moment of massive national pride, but it instantly created a massive logistical nightmare for the French Tennis Federation.
Why is that?
Because of the rules of the Davis Cup. The nation that holds the cup gets the right to host the final of the following year to defend it. So France knows that in 1928, they're going to host the USA in Paris for the rematch. But they realized they didn't have a single tennis stadium in the country large enough to hold the tens of thousands of fans who are going to want to watch it.
Oh, that's a good problem to have, but definitely a problem. Okay. So they had to build one. They approached the city of Paris, and they were granted a 3-hectare plot of land near the Porte d'Auteuil. But the city had one strict condition for the land grant. The stadium had to be named after a specific French hero.
And this is a great trivia fact. The most famous clay court tennis stadium in the world is named after a man who had absolutely nothing to do with tennis.
Nothing at all.
Roland-Garros was a pioneering French aviator. He was the first man to fly non-stop across the Mediterranean Sea. He became a fighter pilot in the First World War and was killed in combat in 1918, just a month before the war ended.
The stadium they built in his honor, Stade Roland-Garros, was completed in 1928. It successfully hosted the Davis Cup defense and immediately became the permanent home of the French internationals.
And we have to talk about the physical surface of this new stadium because it defines the French Open to this day. They built clay courts. But what does that actually mean structurally? Why doesn't it play like grass?
Well, a true red clay court, like those at Roland-Garros, isn't actually made of natural dirt found in the ground. It is a highly engineered, layered drainage system.
It's not just dirt.
No, not at all. You have a deep base of large stones covered by gravel, then clinker or volcanic slag, then a layer of crushed white limestone. The red color only comes from the very top layer, which is literally just a few millimeters of crushed red brick dust.
So you're basically playing on a very thin layer of brick dust. Mechanically, how does that brick dust change the physics of a tennis match?
It does two major things. First, it slows the ball down. When the ball hits the grid of the brick dust, friction grips it, absorbing its forward kinetic energy. Second, it causes the ball to bounce much higher than it does on grass.
Which completely changes the strategy.
Exactly. It nullifies the massive serve and volley game. A huge serve simply slows down and pops up, giving the returner time to hit it back.
It turns the sport into a grueling physical marathon. You can't just hit a quick winner. You have to construct points, hitting 15, 20 shots a rally. Furthermore, the crushed brick acts like ball bearings under the player's shoes, allowing them to slide into their shots rather than planting and stopping. It requires a completely different biomechanical approach to movement.
Exactly. And while the French were building their clay empire, the ILTF made another bureaucratic decision that structured the sport forever. During this era, they formally designated 4 tournaments as the official championships. They recognized the tournaments in Great Britain, France, the USA, and Australia.
The birth of the Grand Slams.
Right.
By locking these 4 tournaments in as the pinnacle of the sport, they established the holy grail of tennis achievements. Throughout the 1930s, the sport cemented its reputation as a high society, internationally glamorous endeavor. You had Britain's Fred Perry dominating the men's side, and America's Helen Wills Moody, who hit the ball with such silent, terrifying power they called her Little Miss Poker Face, winning 8 Wimbledon titles.
But as we analyze this golden age, the champagne, the new stadiums, the formalized Grand Slams, we have to confront a massive, glaring historical blind spot in this narrative.
Yes, we do.
While Europeans and white Americans were formalizing this glamorous global circuit, African Americans were being systematically and entirely excluded from these spaces.
This brings us to a crucial chapter, deeply chronicled in the International Tennis Hall of Fame's Breaking Barriers archive. It is impossible to understand modern tennis without understanding what was happening in America during this era. Following the end of Reconstruction in 1877, African Americans faced violent disenfranchisement and the strict enactment of Jim Crow laws.
Which permeated everything.
Yes, these legally enforced racial segregation in almost every facet of daily life, including public parks and sporting facilities.
And the archives we're looking at framed the response to this systemic, legally enforced racism with a very specific and powerful term, creative survival.
What does creative survival look like in this context?
It meant that if sheer survival and social progress were going to happen, it had to rely on solidarity and the creation of independent, parallel black institutions to service the community's needs.
If the doors are locked, build your own doors.
Exactly. If the doors of the white establishment were locked, you built your own building. We saw this socially with the formation of the NAACP by W.E.B. Du Bois and Ida B. Wells Barnett. We saw it in baseball with the Negro Leagues. And in tennis, African Americans simply built an entirely parallel tennis ecosystem.
If they weren't allowed into the white country clubs, they poured their own courts. The historical details here are incredible. In 1898, a man named Reverend W. W. Walker organized the first interstate tournament for black players in Philadelphia. Black colleges, like the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, formed the earliest faculty tennis clubs, creating a network of educated, passionate players.
The grassroots momentum grew steadily. A fantastic example from the archive is a woman known as Mother Seams in Chicago.
Oh, I love her story.
She and her husband recognized the complete lack of facilities, so they actually purchased property on the south side of Chicago and personally funded and built 4 tennis courts. It became the first private grounds for a black tennis club in the United States.
And in 1921, a group of black businessmen opened the Shady Rest Golf and Tennis Club in Scotch Plains, New Jersey, which became the nation's first fully black-owned and operated country club. But it wasn't just disparate clubs. By 1916, this parallel universe organized at the national level.
Right. Under the leadership of H. Stanton McCard and others, the American Tennis Association, or the ATA, was founded in 1916. It was essentially the black equivalent to the USLTA. The first ATA national championships were held in 1917 at Druid Hill Park in Baltimore.
And I think there is a misconception that these were just recreational leagues, that the ATA was fiercely competitive, and because it developed somewhat independently, it actually drove incredible strategic and mechanical innovation in the sport.
A perfect example of this innovation is a player named Edgar Brown from Indianapolis. In the 1920s, the prevailing style in mainstream white tennis was the chop and net game.
Let's break that down mechanically. What is a chop?
A chop is a shot hit with heavy underspin or backspin. The racket path moves from high to low, basically brushing under the ball. It causes the ball to float low over the net and skid when it bounces.
It's very defensive.
Very defensive, very safe shot, usually used to approach the net. But Edgar Brown popularized something completely different, the topspin baseline game.
And topspin is the absolute opposite mechanic. The racket path goes from low to high, brushing up the back of the ball. This induces the Magnus effect.
All right, physics in action.
The forward rotation of the ball creates high air pressure on top and low air pressure underneath, which literally forces the ball to dive sharply down into the court.
Exactly. Because the ball dives down rapidly, you can hit it much, much harder, higher over the net, and it will still land in bounds. Once it hits the ground, that forward spin makes it kick up aggressively toward the opponent's shoulders. Brown was using this heavy topspin within the ATA decades before it became the dominant global standard on the professional tour.
And we cannot discuss the golden era of the ATA without talking about Ora Washington.
Ora Washington is quite simply one of the most dominant athletes in American history. She began playing tennis in 1924, and by 1929, she had won her first ATA National Singles Championship.
She was a force.
She possessed incredible footwork and mental toughness. Over her career, she won a staggering 23 ATA national championships, 8 in singles, 12 in doubles, and 3 in mixed doubles. She completely ruled the 1930s.
She was essentially untouchable. And while the ATA was thriving and producing world-class talent, the players were acutely aware of the glass ceiling. They were constantly looking over at the USLTA, which ran the U.S. National Championships at Forest Hills, and asking the obvious question, we have the talent, why can't we compete against you?
The first real documented attempts to crack that barrier occurred in the late 1920s. In 1929, Dr. Reginald Weir, who was the captain of the tennis team at the City College of New York, and Gerald Norman Jr., a highly ranked high school champion, decided to test the system.
They forced the issue.
They did. They formally submitted their applications and paid their entry fees for the USLTA Junior Indoor Championships in New York.
But when they actually physically showed up at the Armory to play, they were stopped at the door. They were denied their spots in the draw strictly and explicitly because of their race.
They were completely stonewalled. The USLTA simply refused to acknowledge their entries. But as the 1930s bled into the 1940s, the talent pool at the top of the ATA was getting too deep and the noise was getting too loud for the mainstream tennis world to completely ignore.
Which leads to an incredibly historic exhibition match in 1940. Jimmy McDaniel was the reigning ATA national champion. He was a phenomenal left-handed player, and a match was arranged between him and Don Budge.
And Don Budge was not just any player. He was white, he was the premier professional player in the world at that time, and he had recently completed the calendar year Grand Slam, winning all 4 majors in a single year.
This match took place at the Cosmopolitan Club in Harlem. And the cultural weight of this event cannot be overstated. A capacity crowd of 2,000 people packed the stands to watch the best of the white tennis world play the best of the black tennis world.
That must have been electric.
Oh, Budge won the match, but McDaniel played brilliantly, hitting incredible passing shots. It was a rare, tangible moment where these two parallel universes intersected. It proved visually to everyone there that the talent at the top of the ATA was world-class and belonged on the same court.
Here's where the historical momentum becomes unstoppable. As we move into the post-World War II era, the socio-political dynamics of America are shifting. African-American soldiers are returning from the war in Europe and the Pacific, having fought for freedom abroad, and they are demanding first-class citizenship at home.
The climate was changing.
Right. The modern civil rights movement is gaining legal and social traction. The USLTA could not keep the gates of Forest Hills locked forever.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The pressure was mounting, and the person who finally kicked the door completely off its hinges was a woman named Althea Gibson.
Althea Gibson's life story is cinematic. She's born in South Carolina but raised in Harlem. She was a tough, streetwise kid who preferred playing basketball and paddle tennis in the streets. Her raw athletic ability was noticed by a Play Street director in the early 1940s who bought her a couple of used rackets and directed her to the Cosmopolitan Tennis Club.
And this is where she meets one of the great unsung heroes of tennis history, a man named Fred Johnson. Fred Johnson was a resident professional coach at the Cosmopolitan Club. But what makes him incredible is that he was a one-armed tennis coach.
He had lost his left arm, but he developed a phenomenal understanding of the biomechanics of the sport. He took this raw, powerful teenager and completely broke down her mechanics. He taught her the continental grip, he smoothed out her backhand, and most importantly, he taught her the tactical geometry of the serve and volley game.
He gave her the tools to win.
He channeled her street-tough aggression into a devastatingly effective net game.
Under his guidance, and later supported by other ATA mentors, she quickly dominated the ATA girls' tournaments, winning the national championship in 1947, and then taking over the women's circuit, winning 10 straight ATA titles. By 1950, she was clearly one of the best female players in America. But the USLTA was still dragging its feet, using administrative loopholes to deny her entry into the U.S. National Championships at Forest Hills.
Just moving the goalposts.
Yeah, they claimed she hadn't played enough qualifying tournaments, knowing full well she wasn't allowed into those qualifying tournaments.
It was a classic catch-22 designed to maintain segregation. And this is where a powerful ally from inside the white establishment stepped forward. Alice Marble was a white, four-time U.S. Open champion and one of the most respected figures in the sport. She saw what was happening to Gibson, and she was furious.
In July 1950, Alice Marble writes a blistering, uncompromising editorial in American Lawn Tennis magazine. She publicly shamed the leadership of her own sport. I want to read an exact quote from it because it is so historically vital.
Go for it.
She wrote, "If tennis is a game for ladies and gentlemen, it's also time we acted a little more like gentle people and less like sanctimonious hypocrites. If there is anything left in the name of sportsmanship, it's more than time to display what it means to us."
She literally called them sanctimonious hypocrites in print. And it worked. The public shaming was too much for the USLTA to bear. A few weeks later, they relented. In August 1950, Althea Gibson walked onto the grass courts at Forest Hills, becoming the first African-American to compete in the U.S. National Championships.
But she didn't just break the barrier and passively participate. She eventually conquered the entire sport. She honed her game, and in 1956, she traveled to Paris and won the French National Women's Singles Championship, becoming the first Black person to win a Grand Slam event.
And she proved her immense versatility. She won on the slow clay of Paris in '56, and then the following year, in 1957, she took her aggressive serve and volley game to the fast grass of Wimbledon and won there too.
She comes home from Wimbledon, and the city of New York gives her a ticker tape parade down the Canyon of Heroes. Then she goes to Forest Hills and wins the U.S. Open. And just to prove it wasn't a fluke, she goes back in 1958 and defends both her Wimbledon and U.S. Open titles.
Bad back.
I love her mindset regarding defending a title. She once said, "Winning it once can be a fluke. Winning it twice proves you are the best."
Gibson's breakthrough fundamentally altered the trajectory of the sport. By shattering that ceiling, she validated the decades of work put in by the ATA, and she paved the way for the next generational talent, a young, skinny, incredibly cerebral kid from Richmond, Virginia, named Arthur Ashe.
Ashe's development is deeply intertwined with the ATA network. When he was just a kid, his talent was recognized, and he was sent to train with Dr. R. Walter Whirlwind Johnson in Lynchburg, Virginia. Dr. Johnson was a physician, but his true passion was grooming Black junior players to crack the USLTA barriers.
And Dr. Johnson's training regimen was about much more than just forehands and backhands.
Yeah.
He understood the deeply hostile environment his players were going to face in the white country clubs. So he mandated absolute pristine etiquette.
He had to protect them.
Right. His players were taught to hit the ball exactly to the server, to never argue a line call, and to show zero negative emotion. He knew that any outburst would be weaponized against them. He fortified Ashe with a mental discipline that became his hallmark.
And that rigorous, stoic discipline, combined with Ashe's blistering serve and sliced backhand, carried him to the top. By 1963, Arthur Ashe made history by becoming the first Black man named to the U.S. Davis Cup team. But as Ashe was climbing the ranks, the very structural foundation of tennis was beginning to crack under the weight of its own economic hypocrisy.
We are approaching the single most important structural pivot in tennis history. 1968.
To understand why 1968 matters, we have to explain the concept of amateurism. Because up until that point, the tennis world was essentially split in half, right?
It's exactly. Since the 1920s, tennis had operated under a strict class division. You had the amateurs. Amateurs were the only players allowed to compete in the prestigious Grand Slams. Wimbledon, the French, the U.S. Open, and the Davis Cup.
The glory tournaments.
Right. The ethos was that they played for the love of the game and the glory of the trophies. They were strictly forbidden from accepting prize money.
Then you had the professionals. These were players who decided they actually wanted to make a living utilizing their world-class athletic skills. They joined touring circuits, playing one-night stands in arenas around the world for cash. But the moment they accepted a paycheck, they were permanently banned by the ILTF from ever playing in a Grand Slam again.
And this created a massive drain on talent. As soon as a player like Rod Laver or Ken Rosewall won a few amateur Grand Slams, they would immediately turn pro to cash in, and the Grand Slams would lose their biggest stars. But the real issue, the thing that broke the system, was that the amateur system was a total lie.
The shamateurism. The top amateurs weren't playing for free. The tournament directors at Wimbledon and Forest Hills desperately needed the top stars to sell tickets, so they were secretly paying the amateurs massive amounts of money under the table disguised as travel expenses.
Everyone knew it was happening, but the governing bodies just looked the other way.
But the hypocrisy became unsustainable. Furthermore, the advent of color television and global broadcasting rights meant there was suddenly massive, legitimate corporate money entering the sport. The broadcasters demanded the best players in the world be at the biggest tournaments, regardless of their professional status. So in March 1968, the ILTF held an emergency meeting in Paris.
The British actually forced their hand. Wimbledon announced they were going to accept professionals regardless of what the ILTF said.
They went rogue.
They did, so the ILTF capitulated and agreed to open tennis. Amateurs and professionals could now compete against each other in the Grand Slams for legitimate above-board prize money.
The open era had begun. It instantly legitimized the sport as a modern, transparent profession.
And fittingly, in that very first year of the open era, 1968, the winner of the first ever U.S. Open at Forest Hills was Arthur Ashe. He had to navigate a draw filled with seasoned professionals, and he emerged victorious, becoming the first and to this day the only black man to win the U.S. Open singles title.
Because Ashe was still technically an amateur at that exact moment he was serving as a lieutenant in the U.S. Army, he actually couldn't accept the $14,000 first-place prize money. He only took the $20 per diem. But his victory proved that the new integrated open system was going to produce incredible drama.
But Ashe wasn't just focused on his own trophies. In 1969, recognizing that tennis was still highly inaccessible to kids without money or country club memberships, he co-founded the National Junior Tennis League, the NJTL, with Charlie Passerelle and Sheridan Snyder.
Giving back right away.
Exactly. The goal was to reach kids in inner cities and use tennis as a platform to teach life skills and academic discipline.
So by the early 1970s, tennis is fully professional, it's open, and it has superstars like Ashe. The stakes are higher, the prize money is real, and the sport is primed for a massive explosion in global popularity. But there was a major technological hurdle preventing tennis from becoming a true global television product.
If you think about it, trying to broadcast traditional tennis on a 1960s television set was a visual nightmare.
Why is that?
Because traditional tennis balls were white, and the lines on the court were white, and the players were required to wear all white.
It's just a blizzard on the screen.
Right. Now, imagine watching a tiny white ball flying across a pale green lawn on a small, fuzzy, black and white cathode ray tube television set.
It was virtually invisible on screen. You couldn't follow the rally. A television producer at the BBC named David Attenborough, yes, the famous nature broadcaster, was actually one of the first people to push for color broadcasting of Wimbledon because the contract issues were so severe. So the ILTF realized they had to make a pragmatic technological shift to appease the broadcasters.
In 1972, after a 2-year experimental period, they officially approved the use of the yellow tennis ball. They called the specific shade optic yellow.
Optic yellow?
Yes. It seems like a minor detail, but it was revolutionary. The human eye and early color television cameras pick up that specific wavelength of yellow incredibly well against a green or red background. It made the sport telegenic.
But fixing the color of the ball didn't solve the broadcaster's biggest headache, the unpredictability of time.
Right. Before 1970, to win a set of tennis, you had to win by a margin of 2 clear games. If the score reached 5-5, You kept playing until someone went ahead by 2, 6-4, 8-6, 14-12.
From a physical standpoint, this was exhausting. But from a television broadcasting standpoint, it was a disaster. You cannot sell a 2-hour block of advertising space if you have absolutely no idea if the match is going to last 90 minutes or 5 hours. The television networks demanded a way to reliably end sets.
Enter a man named Jimmy Van Allen. He invented something he called the VSS, the Van Allen Streamlined Scoring System. We know it today as the tiebreak.
The tiebreak.
It was a radical mathematical change. If a set reached 6 games all, instead of playing endlessly, the players would play a single modified game. The first player to reach a set number of points, usually 7, winning by 2, takes the entire set.
The U.S. Open was the first major tournament to adopt the tiebreak in 1970, and it completely changed the psychological pressure of the sport. Suddenly, an entire hour of hard work could be decided by 1 or 2 points in a sudden death shootout.
The U.S. Open leaned into this drama heavily. They used this incredible marketing slogan to sell the new rule to the public. The posters read, "You are cordially invited to sudden death in the afternoon at Forest Hills."
That is how you sell a rule change. You frame it as a gladiator battle.
And with the yellow ball making it visible and the tiebreak making it schedulable and dramatic, tennis was perfectly packaged for the 1970s and 80s. This is the era where the sport exploded into pop culture. It became a clash of massive personalities and deeply contrasting styles.
We're talking about the true superstar era. You had the incredible dichotomy of Bjorn Borg versus John McEnroe. Borg was the ice Borg, stoic, silent, playing this incredibly heavy, consistent topspin baseline game from the back of the court. And across the net is McEnroe, fiery, temperamental, charging the net with a serve and volley game built on unparalleled touch and geometry.
And on the women's side, you had arguably the greatest rivalry in the history of sports. Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova. They played each other 80 times over 15 years.
80 times.
Yes. Evert was the master of baseline precision and the two-handed backhand. Navratilova was a supreme athlete who relentlessly attacked the net and revolutionized off-court fitness and diet.
And as these superstars are pushing the physical limits of the sport, the actual equipment they're holding in their hands undergoes a massive technological revolution. Since Wingfield's box in 1874, players had been using heavy wooden rackets. Wood has a very small sweet spot. It dampens vibration well, but it doesn't generate a lot of power, and it's heavy to swing.
In the late 60s and 70s, you start seeing the introduction of metal rackets. Jimmy Connors famously used the Wilson T2000, a tubular steel racket that acted like a trampoline, giving him unprecedented flat power.
But steel was hard to control, right?
Very hard. The true game changer arrived in the 1980s, graphite.
Graphite and carbon composite materials allowed manufacturers to do something they could never do with wood, make the racket head massively larger while actually making the racket lighter. A standard wood racket head was maybe 65 square inches. Modern graphite rackets jumped to 90, 100, even 110 square inches.
This completely changed the biomechanics of the swing. With a larger, lighter racket, players could utilize extreme grips like the Western grip and brush up the back of the ball with incredible racket head speed, generating massive amounts of topspin and power from the baseline.
So the serve and volley game slowly began to recede, replaced by power baseline tennis. This era is just packed with incredible, iconic moments that push the sport's boundaries. In 1985, during a match, an actual bolt of lightning struck the ground near center court at Wimbledon. But maybe the best example of the sheer physical and psychological warfare of this era happened at Roland-Garros in 1989.
You're referring to the fourth-round match between a 17-year-old American named Michael Chang and the heavily favored world number 1, Ivan Lendl.
It is a masterclass in psychological survival. They are deep into the 5th set. Chang is suffering from full-body cramps. His legs are literally seizing up. He can barely walk, let alone run. Lendl is a physical powerhouse, expecting Chang to just quit, but Chang refuses. To conserve energy and disrupt Lendl's rhythm, Chang starts hitting high, looping moon balls deep into the court.
And then came the moment that shocked the tennis world. At 15:30, in a crucial game, Chang realizes he doesn't have the leg drive to hit a normal serve.
He literally couldn't jump.
Right, so he steps up to the line, drops the ball out of his hand, and hits an underhand serve.
Lendl is so stunned by the audacity of it that he rushes forward and completely messes up the return. Chang eventually wins the match. It was a total mental collapse by Lendl, engineered by a cramping teenager relying on pure instinct.
While these massive televised dramas were unfolding, it is crucial to note the continued progress in diversity, building directly on the legacy of the ATA and Althea Gibson. In the 1980s and 90s, we saw a powerful new generation of black players rising to the very top of the professional ranks.
Players like Zina Garrison, who was incredibly fast and aggressive at the net. She won an Olympic gold medal in doubles in 1988 with Pam Shriver, and in 1990, she reached the Wimbledon singles final, becoming the first black woman to do so since Gibson. We saw Lori McNeil, a phenomenal grass court player who famously shocked the world by upsetting the defending champion Steffi Graf in the first round of Wimbledon in 1994, and Malavi Washington, who reached the men's singles final at Wimbledon in 1996.
And throughout this era, Arthur Ashe continued his profound impact off the court. He understood that his platform gave him a voice, and his activism was tireless. The historical records show he was a leading voice against the apartheid regime in South Africa, fighting to have the country expelled from the Davis Cup, and actually getting arrested outside the South African embassy in Washington, D.C. during a protest.
Later in life, after tragically contracting HIV from a blood transfusion during heart surgery, he refused to hide. He went public with his diagnosis and became a fierce, eloquent advocate for AIDS awareness, education, and research funding before his death in 1993.
His impact on society was so profound that in 1993, he was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. And in 1997, when the USTA built a massive 23,000-seat centerpiece stadium for the U.S. Open, they rightfully named it Arthur Ashe Stadium. He left a legacy that transcended the geometry of the court.
As the 20th century drew to a close, tennis was a massively successful, highly tuned global industry. The technology was set, the Grand Slams were booming. But no one, and I mean no one, could have predicted how profoundly the entire DNA of the sport was about to be rewritten in the 21st century.
The modern era of tennis was defined by anomalies. Things happened that statistically and biomechanically should not have been possible. And it began with two sisters from the public courts of Compton, California.
Venus and Serena Williams. They were coached by their father, Richard, who famously taught himself the game by watching instructional videos. They didn't come up through the traditional, expensive country club junior circuit. They bypassed it entirely. And when they hit the professional tour, they took everything the tennis world knew about power, athleticism, and mental toughness, and they redefined the baseline.
The Williams Revolution began in earnest at the end of the 1990s. In 1999, a 17-year-old Serena Williams won the U.S. Open. She became the first black woman to win a Grand Slam singles title since Althea Gibson in 1958.
From a mechanical standpoint, what made Venus and Serena so devastatingly effective?
It was a combination of unprecedented power and modernized biomechanics, specifically the open stance backhand and the evolution of the serve.
The open stance backhand.
Right. Traditionally, players stepped into their backhand, transferring weight linearly. The Williams sisters, utilizing modern graphite rackets and supreme core strength, could hit their two-handed backhands from an open stance, facing the net, generating massive rotational torque.
They didn't need to step in to create power.
Exactly, and Serena's serve is widely considered the greatest shot in the history of women's tennis. Her ball toss was perfectly disguised. Whether she was hitting a flat bomb down the tee or a heavy slice out wide, the toss looked identical, making it impossible to read.
Their cultural impact was immediate, and it shifted the economic center of gravity in the sport. In 2001, Venus and Serena met in the U.S. Open final. The television network, CBS, realized the magnitude of the event and made the unprecedented decision to move a women's final to primetime television. It became the most watched major tournament match in U.S. history at that time.
But they didn't just dominate the game. They demanded equity from the institutions running it. Venus Williams took up the mantle of Billie Jean King and became instrumental in the final fight for equal prize money at the Grand Slams. By the mid-2000s, Wimbledon was the last major holdout, still paying women less than men.
Which is wild for the 2000s.
Truly. Venus exerted relentless public and private pressure, famously writing an op-ed in the Times of London, shaming the club for its archaic stance.
And it worked. Finally, in 2007, Wimbledon agreed to pay men and women equally, a monumental victory for gender equity in global sports. And on the court, the records are simply staggering. Serena Williams, before her retirement in 2022, amassed 23 major singles titles. She held all 4 majors at once, a feat dubbed the Serena Slam, and she did it twice in her career.
Unbelievable stats.
Together, the sisters won 14 major doubles titles, never losing a Grand Slam doubles final they entered, and captured multiple Olympic gold medals.
They didn't just participate in the sport, they became the orbit around which the entire sport revolved for 2 decades. And remarkably, while the Williams sisters were monopolizing the women's game, the men's game was experiencing its own unprecedented era of statistical absurdity.
The big three, Roger Federer, Rafael Nadal, and Novak Djokovic.
These three men essentially locked down the men's Grand Slams for 20 years. Prior to their arrival, Pete Sampras held the all-time record with 14 Grand Slam titles, and people thought that record would stand for a century. Federer ended up with 20, Nadal with 22, and Djokovic pushing past 24.
The technical contrast between the three of them is what makes the era so fascinating. You had Roger Federer, who moved with this effortless, floating footwork, utilizing a classic single-handed backhand. He was the master of wrasse. Then you had Novak Djokovic, whose flexibility and elasticity allowed him to slide on hard courts, retrieving balls that defied the physics of human joints, acting as a human backboard.
And then you have Rafael Nadal. And to understand Nadal, we have to talk about the physics of the modern string bed.
Right, because rackets evolved from wood to graphite, but the strings evolved too.
Yes. In the 2000s, players started using polyester strings, specifically a brand called Luxilon. These strings are incredibly stiff, but they have a unique property. When the ball hits the string bed, the strings slide out of place and then violently snap back into position before the ball leaves the racket.
The snapback effect.
Exactly. This snapback effect imparts massive, unprecedented amounts of top spin on the ball.
And Rafael Nadal weaponized this technology on the red clay of Roland-Garros like no one in history. By combining his massive left-handed forehand swing with these polyester strings, Nadal was hitting the ball with over 3,200 revolutions per minute of topspin.
3,200 RPMs.
The ball would dive over the net, hit the clay, grip the crushed brick, and violently kick up over his opponent's shoulder.
It was a biomechanical code that could not be cracked on clay. He won the French Open an incomprehensible 14 times. He completely redefined the limits of what is physically possible on a dirt surface.
But the sheer physical demands of this modern, heavy topspin baseline grinding era eventually pushed the human body past its breaking point. The ultimate proof of this occurred in 2010 in a first-round match at Wimbledon between an American, John Isner, and a Frenchman, Nicolas Mahut.
Because Wimbledon did not have a tiebreak in the fifth set at that time, Isner and Mahut got locked in a serving stalemate. Neither man could break the other's serve.
They played for 11 hours and 5 minutes over 3 days. I want you to conceptualize the biology of that.
Yeah.
They are burning upwards of 10,000 calories. Their bodies are completely depleted of glycogen. They are essentially digesting their own muscle tissue for energy. They are hallucinating from sleep deprivation between days.
It's terrifying.
The electronic scoreboard on the court literally broke and went blank because the programmers had never written code for a score to go past 47 all.
Isner eventually won the fifth set, 70-68. It was a testament to sheer human willpower, but it forced the governing bodies to recognize that the modern game had become too physical. It directly led to the eventual introduction of final set tiebreaks across all Grand Slams, because the human body simply wasn't designed to play tennis for 11 hours.
As we move past the era of the Big Three and Serena into the 2020s, the sport is passing the torch to a new generation. And this generation is bringing a deep, highly visible social consciousness with them onto the court.
We saw this vividly in the summer of 2020. The archives document that amidst widespread global protests regarding police shootings and racial injustice, Naomi Osaka utilized her platform as the highest-paid female athlete in the world to force a conversation.
The Cincinnati Open, right?
Yes. During the Cincinnati Open, she formally refused to play her semifinal match to protest the shooting of Jacob Blake in Wisconsin. She released a statement saying, "Before I am an athlete, I am a black woman."
The tournament organizers, realizing the gravity of the moment, actually paused play for the entire tournament for a day in solidarity before she agreed to continue.
And she carried that activism directly into the U.S. Open that year. Over the course of the two-week tournament, she wore 7 different black face masks onto the court, each bearing the name of a black victim of racial injustice, representing the 7 matches she needed to win to claim the title.
Which she did.
Yes, she won all 7 matches and the championship. It was a profound, highly visible merging of athletic dominance and social awareness, as documented by the ITHF.
This modern landscape leading up to 2026 is incredibly vibrant. You have players like Coco Gauff, who burst onto the global scene in 2019 by beating Venus Williams at Wimbledon when she was just 15 years old and fulfilling that immense promise by winning her first U.S. Open in 2023.
On the men's side, you have a resurgence of American energy, with players like Francis Tiafoe, who electrified New York with his run to the U.S. Open semifinals in 2022 by upsetting Nadal. You have Ben Shelton bring this massive, explosive collegiate energy to the tour, and players like Canada's Felix Auger-Aliassime making history for his nation.
And what's really fun is how this generation is bringing new forms of personal expression and internet culture directly into the stadiums. I love this specific detail from the 2024 U.S. Open. Naomi Osaka returned to the tour after maternity leave, and she walked onto the court with this massive custom tennis bag adorned with La Boo Boo bag charm.
Boo Boo charms?
Yes. They are these highly sought-after designer plush toys. She customized them and gave them names honoring tennis history. One of the plushies was named Billie Jean Bling, and another was Arthur Flash, paying direct homage to Billie Jean King and Arthur Ashe through the lens of modern designer toy culture. It went totally viral. It's such a clever, modern way to carry the heavy history of the sport onto the court while remaining completely authentic to her own generation.
It speaks to how the culture of tennis is in a state of constant evolution, and the institutions that govern the sport are working aggressively to keep pace with this modern global reality. We have seen massive institutional rebrands in the last few years.
The Davis Cup, that punch bowl bought by a Harvard student in 1900, underwent a massive format overhaul in 2019, shifting from a year-long home-and-away format to a condensed World Cup-style finals event to better suit modern television and player schedules.
A smart update.
In 2021, the Fed Cup, which is the women's equivalent of the Davis Cup, was rightfully and officially renamed the Billie Jean King Cup, honoring her legacy as a pioneer for equality.
And perhaps most tellingly, in 2025, the ITF, the International Tennis Federation that was founded by those 15 nations in Paris way back in 1913, held a vote. By a 92% majority, they officially rebranded the organization as World Tennis.
World Tennis, it's a very definitive statement. It reflects a sport that has truly, finally shed its insular country club aristocratic origins to become a thoroughly global property.
It really has.
Okay, let's take a breath. We have covered a massive, sprawling journey today. We started with Major Wingfield's wooden box of vulcanized rubber balls and croquet mallets in London in 1874. We witnessed the birth of the Grand Slams and the biomechanical revolutions of topspin and graphite.
We tracked the aggressively segregated courts of Jim Crow America.
Yes, the creative survival and ultimate triumph of the ATA, Althea Gibson and Arthur Ashe. We move through the televised, neon-colored sudden death of the Open era, right up to the heavy topspin, deeply socially conscious billion-dollar global spectacle of 2026. So, what does this all mean?
If we synthesize everything we've dissected today, the overriding theme is that tennis is, and always has been, a highly accurate mirror for society. It has never existed in a vacuum. Every fight for social equality, every technological leap in materials science or broadcasting capability, and every shift in global economic power has played out directly between the baseline and the net.
It's all connected.
The struggles of players like Ora Washington and Althea Gibson were the struggles of a nation trying to reconcile its own hypocrisy. The shift from wood to graphite mirrors the industrial boom of composites. The globalization of the Grand Slams mirrors the globalization of modern satellite media.
And that brings it right back to you, the listener. The next time you turn on your TV or your tablet to watch a Grand Slam final, I want you to remember that you aren't just watching a yellow rubber ball being hit back and forth over a net. You are watching the culmination of 150 years of bitter civil rights battles, of relentless technological innovations, and of unparalleled human drive.
It is a sport that is constantly updating its own source code to survive, to adapt, and to thrive in a changing world.
Which leaves us with one final, slightly provocative thought to ponder. We've seen tennis evolve from a strictly amateur garden party to a hyper-professionalized industry. We've seen it constantly update its rules, like adding the tie break or changing the color of the ball to suit modern attention spans and broadcast schedules. But here's the crazy part. The actual physical dimensions of the court, 78 feet long, 27 feet wide for singles, have remained practically identical to the dimensions Major Wingfield laid out in 1874.
It's the one thing that hasn't changed.
So as we move deeper into the 21st century, an era of AI-stroke analytics, hyper-optimized biomechanics, polyester strings, and athletes who are essentially built like supercomputers, how long will it be before the governing bodies are forced to recognize that the humans have simply outgrown the box? How long before the physical dimensions of Wingfield's 1874 court are finally altered, expanded, to match the superhuman athleticism of the modern player?
Given how much space the modern player covers and how fast the ball travels, altering the geometry of the court might be the only way to preserve the integrity of the rally in the future. It is a fascinating structural question.
Something to mull over the next time you hear that incredible sound of a racket crushing a ball. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.
And that brings another quiet episode of Sleepcast to an end. Thank you for spending this time with us. We hope our two hosts helped you relax, slow your thoughts, and perhaps drift gently off to sleep. New episodes of Sleepcast are released every day, 7 days a week, all year round. Follow Sleepcast on the podcast app you are using now, so new episodes are added automatically, and you can be notified whenever another wonderfully boring story is released. Until next time, sleep peacefully and good night. Sleepcast, probably the most boring podcast in the world.